Captain William Hartwell had served the royal family for 23 years. His tall frame stood perfectly straight as he watched over the palace grounds, his weathered hands gripping the ceremonial sword that had become like an extension of himself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens where he had walked countless times, protecting those within the ancient walls. At 55, William's hair had turned silver at the temples, and deep lines mapped the years of dedication across his face. Every morning he would rise before dawn, polish his uniform until it gleamed, and take his position with the same unwavering commitment he had shown since he was a young man of 32. The palace was not just his workplace. It was his home, his purpose, his entire world. Prince George, now 12 years old, had grown up under William's watchful eye. The captain remembered when the young prince was nothing more than a toddler, running through the corridors with boundless energy, while William followed at a respectful distance. Over the years, he had witnessed the boy's transformation from a mischievous child into a thoughtful young person who carried himself with natural grace. William lived alone in a small apartment near the palace. He had never married, never had children of his own. The royal family had become his family, and protecting them was not just his duty but his calling. His colleagues often joked that he loved the palace more than any person could love a place, but William knew it was true. Every stone, every window, every hidden passage held memories of his service. The other guards respected him deeply. Younger officers would seek his advice, and even the senior staff treated him with the reverence due to someone who had given his entire adult life to the crown. William trained new recruits with patience and wisdom, passing on not just the technical aspects of protection, but the deeper understanding of what it meant to serve. His routine was sacred to him. Morning inspections, afternoon patrols, evening briefings. He knew every face that belonged in the palace and could spot a stranger from 50 yards away. His sharp eyes missed nothing, and his quick reflexes had prevented several security incidents over the years, though most of these moments remained classified and unspoken. But lately, William had been feeling the weight of his years. His back ached after long days of standing, and his knees protested during the lengthy walks around the palace perimeter. Still, he never complained and never showed weakness. The royal family depended on him, and he would not let them down. The morning that would change everything started like any other. William completed his usual inspection, checked in with the security team, and took his position near the main entrance. Prince George was scheduled for tutoring sessions that day, followed by a visit to the palace gardens with his instructor. It was a routine William had overseen hundreds of times before. As the morning progressed, William noticed Prince George seemed different. The young prince appeared more thoughtful than usual, glancing in William's direction several times during his lessons. There was something in the boy's eyes that the experienced guard could not quite identify. It was not mischief or curiosity, but something deeper, more mature than William had seen before. The palace buzzed with its usual activity. Staff members hurried through corridors carrying out their daily tasks, while visitors and officials came and went through the secured entrances. William observed it all with his practiced eye, noting every detail while maintaining his professional composure. Little did he know that by the end of this seemingly ordinary day, his life would be forever changed by a simple gesture from the young prince he had spent so many years protecting. The afternoon brought an unexpected change to the palace routine. Prince George's tutor, Mrs. Henderson, had fallen ill, leaving the young prince with free time he rarely enjoyed. Instead of being whisked away to another lesson or obligation, Prince George found himself wandering the palace corridors with unusual freedom. William watched from his post as the prince moved through the grand hallways, but something was different about the boy's behavior. Rather than the purposeful stride of someone with a destination, Prince George seemed to be observing everything around him with fresh eyes. He stopped to examine portraits he had passed thousands of times, ran his fingers along the ornate woodwork, and smiled warmly at every staff member he encountered. The young prince paused near a large window overlooking the gardens where several groundskeepers were working. William noticed how Prince George's face lit up when he waved at the workers, and how they stopped their tasks to wave back with genuine affection. It was clear that despite his royal status, the prince had managed to form real connections with the people who served his family. As the day continued, William observed Prince George's interactions with increasing interest. The prince spent nearly an hour talking with Mrs. Patterson, the elderly head housekeeper, asking detailed questions about her work and listening intently to her responses. He helped a young page carry heavy boxes, despite protocols that discouraged such behavior. Each interaction seemed genuine and heartfelt, far beyond the polite exchanges typically expected of royalty. During lunch, Prince George sat alone in the grand dining room, as was customary when his parents were away on official business. William stood at his usual position near the entrance, maintaining his professional distance while ensuring the prince's safety. But today, Prince George kept glancing toward the guard, his expression thoughtful and somewhat sad. After finishing his meal, Prince George approached William directly, something that rarely happened during formal duty hours. The young prince looked up at the tall guard with serious eyes that seemed older than his 12 years. "Captain Hartwell," Prince George said quietly. "May I ask you something?" William straightened even further if that were possible and nodded respectfully. "Of course, Your Highness. Do you ever get lonely standing there all day? Do you ever wish you could sit down and have lunch with someone?" The question caught William completely off guard. In all his years of service, no member of the royal family had ever asked him about his personal feelings or comfort. He struggled for a moment to find the appropriate response, balancing honesty with protocol. "Your Highness," William replied carefully. "Serving your family is my greatest honor. I am content in my duties." Prince George studied the guard's face intently, as if trying to read the truth behind the formal words. The boy's intelligence and intuition were remarkable, and William felt that those young eyes could see more than most adults ever noticed. "But you never leave the palace, do you?" Prince George continued. "Mrs. Patterson told me you've been here every single day for over 20 years. Don't you miss having friends outside these walls? Don't you miss having a different kind of life?" William felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he had buried so deeply he had almost forgotten it existed. The prince's questions touched on thoughts he had pushed away for years, dreams he had sacrificed for duty, and a loneliness he had learned to ignore. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Prince George's afternoon instructor, but the young prince's words lingered in William's mind for the rest of the day. For the first time in decades, the captain found himself questioning not his loyalty or dedication, but whether the life he had chosen had cost him more than he had ever allowed himself to consider. That evening, William found sleep impossible. Prince George's innocent questions had opened a door in his mind that he had kept firmly locked for years. He lay in his small apartment staring at the ceiling and thinking about the life he might have lived if he had made different choices. He remembered Sarah, the young woman he had met just before joining the Royal Guard. She had worked at a bookshop in London, with kind eyes and a laugh that could brighten any room. They had dated for several months, and William had even considered proposing. But when the opportunity to serve the royal family arose, he chose duty over love. Sarah had waited for him at first, but eventually married someone else who could give her a normal life. William had told himself then that he was making the right choice, that serving something greater than himself was worth any personal sacrifice. Now, decades later, he wondered if he had been fooling himself. Had his dedication been noble, or had it simply been an escape from the complicated realities of ordinary life? The next morning brought another surprise. Prince George appeared at William's post carrying a small wrapped package and wearing an expression of nervous determination. The boy had clearly been planning something, and William could see both excitement and anxiety in his young face. "Captain Hartwell," Prince George said formally, then dropped his voice to a whisper. "I have something for you, but you have to promise not to tell anyone where you got it." William raised an eyebrow but nodded his agreement. The prince handed him the package, which was surprisingly heavy for its size. When William unwrapped it, he found a beautiful wooden picture frame containing a photograph he had never seen before. The picture showed William from his early days at the palace, standing proudly in his crisp uniform next to a very young Prince George. The little boy in the photo was grinning widely while William's face showed the hint of a smile, a rare break in his usually stoic expression. It was a candid moment that someone had captured without William's knowledge. "I found this in the palace archives," Prince George explained quietly. "I thought you should have it. Mrs. Patterson helped me get the frame. She said you probably don't have many pictures of yourself, since you're always the one protecting everyone else." William felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, the fact that this young prince had taken time to think about his happiness was overwhelming. He had received commendations and formal recognition over the years, but nothing had ever touched him as deeply as this simple, personal gift. "Your Highness," William began, his voice slightly rough, "this is very kind, but I'm not sure I should accept such a personal gift." Prince George's face fell slightly. "Don't you like it?" I thought maybe you'd want to have something to remember the happy times, not just the work parts." The innocence and genuine concern in the boy's voice broke through years of William's emotional barriers. This child, who had been born into unimaginable privilege, had somehow understood that William needed to be seen as a person, not just a protector. "I love it, Your Highness," William said sincerely. "It's the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." Prince George beamed with relief and happiness. "Really? Mrs. Patterson said that everyone needs to feel special sometimes, even the people who take care of others. She said you've spent so much time taking care of us that maybe nobody remembers to take care of you." The wisdom in these words, coming from someone so young, hit William like a physical blow. He realized that this 12-year-old boy had seen something that William himself had been unable or unwilling to acknowledge. The prince had recognized his humanity in a way that years of professional accolades never could. As Prince George skipped away to his next appointment, William stood holding the framed photograph, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted inside him. The boy's kindness had awakened feelings and longings that William had spent decades suppressing, and there was no going back to the way things were before. Over the following weeks, Prince George continued his subtle campaign of kindness toward William. The gestures were small but consistent, always delivered with the discretion that royal protocol demanded. A cup of tea would appear at William's post during long afternoon shifts, brought by a servant with a quiet message that someone thought you might be thirsty. Fresh flowers from the palace garden would be placed near his station, supposedly for decoration, but clearly positioned where only William would truly appreciate them. Most remarkably, Prince George began engaging William in brief conversations whenever their paths crossed naturally. These weren't the formal exchanges of duty, but genuine human connections. The prince would ask about William's thoughts on the weather, share amusing stories from his lessons, or simply offer a warm smile that acknowledged William as more than just a fixture in the palace. The other staff members began to notice the change in their longtime colleague. William's rigid posture seemed to relax slightly, and his stern expression softened when he thought no one was watching. Mrs. Patterson, who had worked at the palace almost as long as William, mentioned to her fellow housekeepers that the captain seemed different somehow, more present and alive than he had been in years. William himself was experiencing an internal revolution. Prince George's kindness had awakened a part of him that he had thought was permanently dormant. He found himself remembering dreams he had abandoned, relationships he had sacrificed, and experiences he had never allowed himself to have. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. One particularly quiet afternoon, as William stood at his post watching Prince George practice piano through an open window, he caught sight of his reflection in a mirror across the hallway. The man looking back at him seemed older than his 55 years, worn down by decades of unchanging routine. His uniform, which had once made him feel proud and important, now felt like a costume that had trapped him in a role he was no longer sure he wanted to play. That evening, William made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. He pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter he had never thought he would compose. It was a resignation letter, formal and respectful, but firm in its intent. As he wrote, his hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the magnitude of what he was considering. The letter explained his gratitude for the opportunity to serve, his deep respect for the royal family, and his belief that after 23 years, it was time for him to step aside and allow a younger person to take his place. He mentioned nothing about Prince George's influence, knowing that such personal details had no place in an official document. But even as he wrote the words, William struggled with doubt. What would he do with his life outside the palace walls? Where would he go? How would he survive financially and emotionally without the structure that had defined him for so long? The palace had been his entire world, and the thought of leaving it felt like planning his own exile. The next morning, William placed the sealed letter in his desk drawer, but did not submit it. He told himself he needed more time to think, but in truth he was paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. The gap between recognizing the need for change and actually making that change seemed impossibly wide. Prince George, with the intuitive intelligence that had started this entire transformation, seemed to sense William's internal struggle. The boy's kindness continued, but there was a new quality to it, a gentle persistence that suggested he understood more about William's situation than anyone might expect from someone his age. During one of their brief conversations, Prince George made a comment that hit particularly close to home. "Captain Hartwell," the prince said quietly, "my tutor says that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not staying in a safe place, but having the courage to find where they really belong." The words were clearly meant for William, delivered with the careful timing of someone who had been thinking deeply about the situation. Prince George had somehow recognized that his acts of kindness had created a problem as much as they had solved one, and he was gently encouraging William to find the courage to act on his newfound awareness. That night, William sat in his small apartment holding the framed photograph Prince George had given him, wondering if he had the strength to change a life that had been set in stone for more than 2 decades. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday morning when William received news that changed everything. Mrs. Patterson approached him during his morning rounds with a somber expression that immediately put him on alert. She carried an official-looking envelope that bore the seal of the palace administration. "Captain," she said gently, "this came for you this morning. I thought you should see it right away." William opened the envelope with steady hands, but his composure cracked as he read the contents. It was a formal notice that due to budget restructuring and modernization efforts, several long-term positions would be eliminated over the next year. His name was on a list of employees who would be offered early retirement packages with full benefits. But the message was clear. His time at the palace was coming to an end whether he chose it or not. The irony was not lost on him. For weeks he had been struggling with the decision to leave, and now that choice was being made for him. The palace administration was framing it as an honor, recognizing his years of dedicated service and offering him a generous financial package that would allow him to retire comfortably. But William felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Mrs. Patterson, who had been watching his face as he read, placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Oh, William," she said softly, using his first name as she rarely did during working hours. "I'm so sorry. I know this place is your whole life." William looked up from the letter, his eyes meeting those of a woman who had become one of his few genuine friends over the years. In her expression he saw sympathy, but also something else, something that looked almost like relief. "Maybe," Mrs. Patterson continued carefully, "this is the universe's way of telling you it's time for something new. You've given this place your best years, William. Maybe now it's time to give yourself a chance." Her words echoed the thoughts that had been growing in his mind since Prince George first showed him kindness. William realized that his colleagues had been watching his transformation as closely as he had been experiencing it. They had seen the change in him, the awakening of something that had been sleeping for too long. That afternoon, Prince George appeared at William's post with his usual cheerful demeanor, but his face fell when he noticed the guard's subdued mood. The perceptive boy immediately sensed that something was wrong. "Captain Hartwell," Prince George said quietly, "you look sad today. Did something happen?" William hesitated, unsure how much he should share with the young prince. But something about the boy's genuine concern and the memory of all his kindnesses made William decide to be honest. "Your Highness," William said carefully, "I received some news today about changes coming to the palace. It seems my time here may be coming to an end soon." Prince George's eyes widened with shock and what appeared to be genuine distress. "You're leaving? But you can't leave. You've always been here. This place won't be the same without you." The raw emotion in the boy's voice touched William deeply. It was clear that Prince George had come to see him as more than just a guard, perhaps even as a friend. The thought that his departure would genuinely sadden this remarkable young person filled William with both warmth and melancholy. "Sometimes, Your Highness," William said gently, "changes happen whether we want them or not. But maybe that's not always a bad thing." Prince George was quiet for a long moment, his young mind clearly working through the implications of what William had said. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful and mature beyond his years. "Mrs. Henderson always says that endings can be beginnings if you look at them the right way," the prince said slowly. "Maybe this means you'll get to have adventures you never could have had before." The wisdom in those words, coming from someone who had never known life outside the palace walls, struck William as both profound and heartbreaking. This boy, who had been born into a life of predetermined duties and obligations, was encouraging him to embrace the freedom that William had never allowed himself to want. "You know, Your Highness," William said with a small smile, "I think you might be right about that." That evening, William pulled his resignation letter from the desk drawer, where it had been waiting for weeks. But instead of submitting it as originally written, he tore it up and began crafting a new one. This letter was different, more positive and forward-looking. It thanked the palace administration for forcing him to confront a decision he had been too afraid to make on his own. The final week of William's service passed in a blur of emotions and preparations. Word of his departure had spread throughout the palace staff, and the outpouring of affection and respect from his colleagues was overwhelming. Many shared stories of times when William had helped them, protected them, or simply been a steady presence during difficult moments. The royal family officially acknowledged his service with a formal ceremony attended by palace dignitaries and staff. William stood in his dress uniform for the last time, accepting commendations and expressions of gratitude that felt both meaningful and strange. After so many years of working in the background, being the center of attention felt uncomfortable, but also oddly validating. But it was the private moments that meant the most to him. Mrs. Patterson presented him with a scrapbook filled with photographs and mementos from his years at the palace, many items he had never seen before. The younger guards he had trained over the years each took time to thank him personally, telling him how his guidance had shaped their careers and their understanding of what it meant to serve with honor. Prince George's farewell was the most difficult of all. The young prince requested a private meeting in the palace garden, away from the formal protocols and watching eyes of the court. When they met beneath an old oak tree where William had often stood guard during royal family gatherings, Prince George's composure finally cracked. "I'm going to miss you so much," the boy said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I'm supposed to be happy for you, but I don't want you to go." William knelt down to Prince George's eye level, something he had never done in all their years of formal interactions. "Your Highness," he said gently, "you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. You showed me that I was more than just my job, more than just a guard. You saw me as a person when I had forgotten how to see myself that way." Prince George looked confused. "I don't understand. I didn't do anything special." "That's exactly what made it so special," William replied. "You were kind to me because it was natural for you, not because you had to be. You asked about my feelings because you cared, not because it was required. You reminded me that I deserve happiness too." The young prince wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to maintain the dignity he had been taught was expected of him. "Will you write to me? Will you tell me about your adventures?" William smiled, realizing that Prince George still saw his departure as the beginning of an exciting journey, rather than an ending. The boy's optimism was infectious, and William found himself beginning to share that perspective. "I promise to write," William said solemnly, "and I promise to have adventures worth writing about." As their final conversation drew to a close, Prince George pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "This is for you to open when you're in your new life," he said seriously. "Mrs. Patterson helped me write it, but the words are mine." William accepted the envelope with hands that trembled slightly. The weight of the moment, the finality of leaving this boy who had changed his life so profoundly, was almost unbearable. But there was also excitement building in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in decades. On his last night in the palace apartment, William packed his few personal belongings into 2 modest suitcases. Among his possessions was the framed photograph Prince George had given him, which had become his most treasured item. He also carefully tucked away the unopened envelope, saving it for the right moment. As he walked through the palace corridors for the final time, William felt as though he was seeing everything with new eyes. The portraits on the walls, the elegant furniture, the grand architecture that had been his entire world for 23 years now seemed like beautiful memories rather than the boundaries of his existence at the main entrance where he had stood guard countless times. William paused to look back one final time. The palace would continue without him, protected by younger, stronger guards who would serve with the same dedication he had shown. But his legacy would live on in the people he had trained, the traditions he had upheld, and most importantly, in the young prince who had taught him that service and personal fulfillment did not have to be mutually exclusive. Stepping out into the early morning air, William Hartwell began the first day of the rest of his life, carrying with him the profound lesson that sometimes the greatest act of service is knowing when it's time to serve yourself. 3 months later, William sat in a small cafe in the coastal town of Brighton, watching the morning waves crash against the shore through the window beside his table. His new life was simpler but richer than anything he had imagined possible during his palace years. The generous retirement package had allowed him to purchase a modest cottage near the sea, fulfilling a dream he had barely allowed himself to acknowledge. The cottage came with a small garden that William had discovered he loved tending. Working with soil and plants after decades of polished marble floors and manicured palace grounds felt like a kind of meditation. His neighbors, a retired teacher named Margaret and her husband Frank, had become genuine friends in a way that William had never experienced as an adult. He had opened Prince George's letter on his first morning in the cottage, sitting on his new front porch with a cup of tea and the sound of seagulls overhead. The letter, written in the careful handwriting of a 12-year-old, had brought tears to his eyes. "Dear Captain Hartwell, I hope by the time you read this you are somewhere beautiful having a wonderful time. I wanted you to know that you taught me something very important. You showed me that being loyal and kind doesn't mean you have to forget about yourself. You also showed me that real friendship can happen between anyone, even a prince and a guard. I will always remember you, and I hope you will always remember that you made my childhood better just by being there. Your friend forever, Prince George." William had framed that letter and placed it next to the photograph the prince had given him, creating a small shrine to the relationship that had changed his life. True to his promise, William wrote to Prince George regularly, sharing stories of his new adventures. He wrote about learning to cook proper meals instead of eating palace cafeteria food, about the stray cat that had adopted him and now ruled his cottage, and about the book he had started writing about his years of royal service. The prince's letters in return were filled with enthusiasm and curiosity about William's new life. Prince George shared updates about his studies, his growing involvement in charitable work, and the new guard captain who had taken William's place. The boy's letters showed a maturity and thoughtfulness that impressed William deeply, and he often wondered if their friendship had influenced the prince's development as much as it had changed his own life. William's book project had begun as a simple memoir but had evolved into something more meaningful. He was writing about the importance of human connection in even the most formal environments, about the courage required to change a life that no longer fits, and about the unexpected wisdom that can come from the young people we're meant to protect and guide. Several publishers had expressed interest in his manuscript, particularly impressed by his insights into the private moments that humanize public figures. William was careful to respect the privacy of the royal family while sharing the universal truths he had learned about service, sacrifice, and the importance of maintaining one's humanity in any role. On a particularly beautiful afternoon, as William worked in his garden with his cat supervising from a sunny spot on the stone wall, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. A year ago, he could never have imagined feeling so content while so far from the palace that had defined him for decades. His phone rang, interrupting his peaceful thoughts. The caller ID showed the palace number, and William's heart skipped with a mixture of excitement and concern. When he answered, he was delighted to hear Prince George's voice, slightly deeper now but still carrying the warmth and intelligence that had first captured William's attention. "Captain Hartwell," the prince said excitedly. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I wanted to tell you some wonderful news." William smiled, settling into his garden chair to enjoy the conversation. "Your Highness, it's never a bad time to hear from you. What's your news?" "I've been accepted into a special program where I'll spend a year working with different charities and organizations," Prince George explained eagerly. "I'll be helping at hospitals, schools, and community centers. I wanted you to know because you inspired this idea. You showed me that serving people doesn't always mean standing at attention in a uniform. Sometimes it means getting your hands dirty and really connecting with people." William felt a surge of pride and emotion. The boy he had watched grow up was becoming the kind of leader who would serve not from duty alone, but from genuine care and understanding. Prince George had taken the lessons from their unlikely friendship and was applying them to his role as a future king. "Your Highness," William said, his voice thick with emotion, "that's the most wonderful news I've heard in a long time. I'm so proud of the man you're becoming." As their conversation continued, William realized that his greatest service to the royal family might not have been the 23 years he spent protecting them with his vigilance and dedication. Instead, it might have been the moment he allowed himself to be human enough to accept kindness from a young prince, teaching that boy in return that true leadership comes from recognizing the humanity in everyone around you. When the call ended, William returned to his gardening with a heart full of gratitude for the unexpected ways life can change when we're brave enough to let it.